2025 National NRDAR Workshop. Official logo of U.S. Department of the Interior, March 3, 1849. Official logo of ORDA. Official logo of USGS, Science for a Changing World. Throughout the presentation, the presenter's cursor moves to indicate what he is talking about on his slides.
But folks, next up we have Matt Germino. He's going to talk to us about solutions to invasive grass and wildfire problems and share some insights from herbicide trials along Western highways. By way of introduction, Matt is a supervisory scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Boise, Idaho, where he developed and leads the Fire, Invasives, and Restoration Ecology of Shrub STEP team. And they address invasive grass and wildfire problems affecting rangelands and other drylands in the Western USA. The team provides innovation in vegetation monitoring and mapping across large areas, wildfire risk assessments, science for managing burned areas or prioritizing fuels treatments, research and development of herbicides and other restoration techniques, and studies on optimizing grazing. So Matt, thanks so much for joining us, and over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Sound check. Can everybody hear?
I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And you can see my screen in good order, including the cursor?
Yes. Let me see your cursor. Yes, I see it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks for the introduction. My colleague, Dr. Bryn Lazarus, is here with me. Who is not here and who I wish could be is the very large team of young and very high caliber researchers who have worked with us to create the information that I'm going to present. They're known as the FIRES team, and this is an acronym that stands for FIRES. That includes like fire modeling, invasives, and you'll see we're going to focus a lot on the most severe exotic plant invaders in not just the Department of Interior, but all federal agencies, and huge impact on number of acres in the United States. Restoration, ecology, and the SS here stands for shrub STEP, which refers to semi-arid uplands in the United States. And so in contrast to the previous excellent presentation on wet environments, we're moving now to the vast expanses of dry environments where we have a very expensive, damaging, and costly problem with invasive grasses and the wildfires they promote. And our focus here, let's see if I can get this to advance.
Photos show groups of people in the field.
Okay, here's a little bit more on our team. Here's our core group of PhD specialists in fire modeling, soils, herbicides, etc. Every year, we do a lot of administrative work to bring on college students to get the numbers of people on the ground required to do the monitoring. We work very extensively and always hip and hip with the people in the Department of Interior, as well as state agencies and private or NGO groups, the individuals who actually apply herbicides and do the management on the ground. So what we're going to talk about today is finding cost-effective solutions to a national biothreat and what's become a security issue. One of our key partners is the Department of Defense, who's told us repeatedly that most of the training area that they deal with is in dry uplands, much like those managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and wildfires fueled by cheatgrass and other exotic plants are their number one threats to management. We work extensively with the Department of Interior's Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program.
Invasive annual grasses, wildfire, and post-fire degradation create immense, long-lasting, costly, and hazardous damage in the Western USA. Two photos show vast arid rangeland landscapes. Photo from Nolan Priest of NV. See his amazing website.
So a little bit of background here to the issue. So normally our semi-arid uplands have a mix of perennial, evergreen, deciduous species that are somewhat adapted to fire. Many of the herbs can resprout after wildfires, and they were adapted to a low frequency of small patchy fires. Now, these landscapes are subject to a high frequency of recurring megafires. And those fires are fueled in large part by exotic annual grasses, most notoriously cheatgrass, which produce extensive mats of wildfire fuels, such as those you can see here, that are readily ignited, are dry for most of the year, in spite of the fact that there might be deep soil moisture below their roots, and they pass fire along readily across the landscape. This creates extensive problems with fire safety and human risks, and additionally has caused catastrophic problems for the livestock industry in terms of loss of forage and also major loss of habitat and wildlife problems. So a little bit more on the invaders. Most people know about cheatgrass. Here you can see pictures of the fine textured fuels that are already dry in late spring, and they'll remain dry for most of the year. Newer exotic annual grasses such as Medusa head or North Africa wiregrass are invading new areas, but more importantly, replacing areas that have already been invaded by cheatgrass.
Photo of a dirt road through a dry, grassy landscape. Photo of a vast, blackened landscape after a fire. Links to 2 YouTube videos linked in this video's transcript. Dust storm following cheatgrass-fueled wildfire, Oregon 2012, and dust/ash storm hits Burn Junction, US 95 in Oregon. A link is shown but not linked. When the pot boiled over.
These species can reestablish readily after wildfire. So not only do they promote wildfire, but they have a competitive advantage after the fire. And fire is a direct, immediate threat. It causes closures of highways, but it can also cause some really hideous problems that are shown here in these videos. And let's see if this will actually transmit to you. So I need to slide this down into here.
A YouTube video plays. From the perspective of a stationary car, a massive rolling wall of dust and ash approaches from the horizon, completely engulfing the landscape.
So here's just some videos. This is a massive wall of sediment rolling off of a wildfire in eastern Oregon. Okay, it gets more dramatic.
A YouTube video plays. From the perspective of a truck's dashboard, the truck drives into a thick brown-gray dust and ash storm.
You don't hear much about these because they occur in very remote areas, but this is impacting massive land areas. Here again, along the highway.
Video continues to play.
Moments later.
In video, visibility drops to near zero. Matt fast forwards through the video, showing mostly a black screen.
It's not just the smoke, it's the soil eroding after these wildfires that has impacted millions of acres. And here's another link that you can click on later, which tells a remarkable story of how a massive erosion event following a wildfire in Boise triggered some of the most intensive rehabilitation and reclamation efforts. In the interest of time, I'll skip over it. So the issue here is that the invasions and the wildfires, they both affect the critical highway paths that our economy and our society relies upon. But at the same time, these highways are vectors for the invasives and obviously can be points in the landscape where we might expect fires to be triggered. Cars obviously are places where you might get cigarettes thrown out of the car, or in the undersides of the cars are hot, and when people pull over on the sides of roads, oftentimes they can trigger fires. So what's interesting is how rarely we have the Department of Transportation at the table to deal with these large-scale issues.
Decision space to break the annual grass and fire cycle, resist, accept, direct, defend, or grow core. Photos show different landscape conditions. A healthy sagebrush landscape, a completely burned area with charred brush stumps, a field of dry, invasive annual grass, and a field with neat rows of newly planted seedlings.
So management has been intensive over the years to try to deal with the issue. The decision framework is that we can either accept the change, that's happened all too much. Here we've seen intact sagebrush step systems that have bare soil between them. That's very important for moderating wildfire risk. Conversion to exotic annual grassland obviously is undesirable. Accepting that change comes at a very severe cost to the tune of millions of dollars. And after the fire, oftentimes we have a clean template to work with. This is a landscape in which we might be able to get herbicides, pre-emergent herbicides, into the soil, which will inhibit the germination of any species. That provides a selective disadvantage to annuals of any type, either native or invasive, and would hopefully provide a selective advantage for any residual perennials, resprouting bunch grasses, for example, that can come back. Now, too often, there are no longer enough native or desirable perennials left in a landscape before the fire. Therefore, after the fire, you're more likely to be invaded. So managers have often seeded naturalized imported species like Siberian wheatgrass or crusted wheatgrass, which come from Eurasia. They're cheap, they establish pretty well, and here you can see a desirable recovery along a roadway.
Integrating active and passive restoration, often after fire.
We can apply the herbicides, pre-emergent herbicides, a Mazapic, $10 an acre, a new herbicide, Redruva, which is supposed to last longer, at $50 an acre. We can fill C-5A aircraft and fly them along or drive trucks with booms. The long-term effectiveness of these treatments requires that the desirable perennial grasses that can compete against the cheatgrass, they take sometimes 5 or 10 years to recover. Sometimes we need to drill seed them into the ground using minimum till or more impactful, deeper furrowing drill seeding. But the real problem that oftentimes is overlooked is that we need to address the drivers of change, which sometimes can be inappropriate grazing that happened decades before. And here we also have to worry about livestock eating the newly recovering vegetation that are sensitive. Livestock are also crucial for reducing fuels. If they eat the grasses, then there's less fuel to cause fire problems down the road.
A series of 4 maps of the western United States that each highlight the same area, with the following titles: Great Basin wildfires from 1870 to 2015, change in annual grass from 2000 to 2016, loss of sagebrush from 2001 to 2014, and land treatments from 1940 to 2016.
The extent of the problem can be shown here. It is millions of acres every year being affected by wildfire, and the wildfire maps superimpose really well onto invasion maps, which relate inversely to the loss of habitat. And here you can see all of this is up to 2016. You can double the amount of area impacted by the problem or the management response since 2016. So the amount of money spent on this is to the tune of, for example, last year, about $60 million was requested by the Department of Interior's Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program. Billions have been spent in the 2 decades of my career on this problem. There has been a finger pointed at the low success rate of these treatments. And I want to emphasize that because of the policy guidelines, the managers have been forced to use one and done treatment interventions. In these slow-growing, drought-prone systems, a more programmatic, long-term approach is probably more appropriate and will lead to greater success. We've been coordinating very closely with the managers to provide a more adaptive management programmatic intervention.
Photo showing a clear line where a fuel break was created in between dense sagebrush and mostly bare ground. 2024 research article authored by Matt from the Journal of Fire Ecology, linked in transcript.
Another major intervention is using fuel breaks to moderate the fuel loading and provide an opportunity for fire suppression personnel to get in safely into these landscapes to suppress fires and contain them. And they use herbicides for that, as well as mowing and other treatments. The fires team works extensively to help the managers devise metrics for success. How do we know when the treatments are successful? I don't have enough time to talk about that today, but for this, we need to identify thresholds of annual grasses. At what cover of annual grasses should we begin to worry? Conversely, how much do we need to reduce annual grass cover before we consider a landscape successfully treated? Something we work extensively on.
Rejuva herbicide application followed by drought, defended but did not grow the core. Lazarus and Germino, 2025 Rangeland Ecology and Management.
I'll only show you 2 graphs today. I'd love to show you more. Just how effective are these treatments? Here's the more expensive new pre-emergent herbicide that's on the market. We nominally think of 20% cover of annual grasses as a problem. If we can keep annual grasses below 20%, we can feel good and secure about the future. Here you can see that after a wildfire in patches that either didn't burn or did burn, we applied Rejuva or not. In those so-called untreated control areas, the level of annual grasses, cheatgrass mainly, eventually became more than 20%. So this is undesirable right here. The Rejuva treatment kept that annual grass level below 20%. So that's a desirable outcome. In the burned area, where we wanted to try to increase the health of the condition of the landscape, unfortunately, the herbicide didn't have the expected control. Now, this contradicts what we've seen in other areas. And I want to emphasize to you that we see a lot of variability in the herbicide effectiveness, except for the fact that generally we do see some target effects.
Charts shown are from Matt's 2022 research article from the Journal of Ecological Solutions and Evidence, linked in transcript.
Here's a more complex graph, which shows Rejuva, which is the chemical name is Invasive-Grass, and Imazapic, which has been the workhorse, sprayed onto millions of acres in the Department of Interior lands and private over the years. And here you can see there's lots of, in some cases, in a heavily degraded area, we have seen some pretty good control of a cocktail of these 2 herbicides. But when we apply the individual elements in different years that happen to vary in how wet they were in the spring or after herbicide application, we see considerable variability.
2025 research article authored by Matt and Bryn from the Journal of Rangeland Ecology and Management, linked in transcript. Photo of mostly bare ground with some clumps of green grasses.
We also see a lot of variability in space. So here is a massive spraying that occurred right along I-84 in southern Idaho. And there was very strong effects of the cocktail, but it only lasted a few years. We think that the incompleteness of the herbicide spraying led to these, what we call escapes. So some cheatgrass escaped the treatment. Those plants that escaped treatments were shown by my colleague Bryn here to have lots of soil nitrogen and nutrients and water available to them. And maybe that can explain why those escaped cheatgrass in these herbicided areas produced huge amounts of seed, much more so than if they had never been treated.
Determining and using the right seed at the right time in the right place.
Now, lots of bare soil in that last picture. What do we need to do? We need to get the native perennials back in sight. We're doing a lot of work to figure out what are the best seed sources, what are the best species, what are the best varieties or population origins, climate of origins of these seed species. We want plants that are adapted to the local climates. It turns out there's a shortfall of information needed to guide the seed transfers that occur for this.
Translating vegetation change and management outcomes into fire risk.
Lastly, how do all of these changes on the landscape relate to fire behavior? The fires team has really transformed the science to inform adaptive management on this. We can quantify the rate of spread and things like flame lengths. Managers can combat fires on the ground if we can keep flame lengths below 4 feet. When flame lengths get above 8 feet, really good luck trying to control the fire. It's probably not even possible even with aircraft dropping flame retardant.
Understanding variability and informing treatment and retreatment options. 2024 research article authored by Matt from the Journal of Environmental Management, linked in transcript. A series of graphs is shown.
So we're looking at how much fuel there is with and without herbicide in different areas, quantifying rate of spread and flame lengths using very sophisticated fire behavior models on supercomputers. And here you can see flame lengths at these different thresholds related to the likelihood that the treatments can actually reduce cheatgrass or other exotic annuals to certain levels. This creates a very new decision framework to allow the managers to figure out where do they most need to apply these treatments to break the annual grass fire cycle, and more importantly, where are they most likely to achieve an appreciable management result. So to take home, we've got a fires team here. We're addressing many of the components along the points in the landscape where we have the greatest risk. We're doing this with the Department of Defense, Department of Interior, many Western states and private landowners who are trying to overcome the low success historically in these restoration interventions. Herbicides are an imperfect tool, but we're getting better, specifically by understanding both the target as well as the non-target impacts.
Screen temporarily goes black.
We need to have this continued integration of doing science with the managers, using their treatments as the scientific treatments in order to learn how to break this path. The feedbacks that are occurring in the cheatgrass fire cycle are very much an indicator of the desertification process, and we need to overcome this. So we've lost a lot of the teammates on the fires team. We are part of the ecosystems management area, ecosystems mission area. This team has done transformative work in terms of the monitoring and informing how to break the annual grass cycle. You can read about more of this if you Google the 2015 Soda wildfire, the most significant monitoring effort ever on a burned area in the world, especially in the Department of Interior. It's become the best well-studied landscape ever, most heavily treated as well. And it's an incredible source of insight on the grass fire cycle. So I run a little long. Do I have time for questions?
We do have 2 questions. Hopefully they're quick.
Okay.
Do you have, we got some more, so I might ask you to check the Q&A after I switch over.
Okay.
But any information on herbicides affecting the fires or volumes of certain herbicides?
Well, Bryn has a kind of a cool story about the Boise, it's state-owned lands, the Boise Wildlife Management Area. And you applied some experimental herbicide treatments, and then a wildfire came several years after. And what happened?
Right. Well, we had 2 plots that were inside the perimeter of the wildfire. One of them burned, but one of them, the fire went around the edges of and left our planted plants and our expensive meteorological equipment intact.
That was good. So basically, where Bryn had applied the herbicide, she had modified the fuels so that the fire did not have enough consumable fuel to pass through the plots. So yes, we've seen, so you can't spray herbicides on a fire. You can't, it's impossible to spray herbicides ahead of a known fire. But what the fires team does is evaluates where wildland fire fuels are becoming problematic in the midterm, over years, and then can inform the land managers on where the greatest risks lie. And those areas then become prioritized for herbicide interventions. And we have lots of examples of how that's saved incredible amounts of money, as well as protected human health and safety by diverting fire.
No chat or Q&A are shown on screen.
Okay, one other quick question, then I'll ask you guys to check the other ones out in the chat or the Q&A. I got to stop saying chat. So soil with cryptograms have been shown to resist cheatgrass invasion. Does the herbicide have effect on cryptograms?
Great question. In the short term, sometimes we see transient declines or decreases in those crusts. However, all of the evidence we have is that if anything, the mid to long-term effect is positive. And we think that's because the herbicides tend to create more bare soil exposure. And the biocrusts they're typically thought of as being slow growing, but those lichens and those mosses oftentimes can grow and cover new bare soil faster than we think. So in many cases, they have increased after wildfire. And and after herbicide too. And that's really great because from our perspective, biocrusts give you something like a booster shot to extend the benefits of the herbicide treatment into the long run. The herbicides, as I showed you, only last a few years. If they promote biocrusts, and that's exactly what we're observing, then the net benefit can be extended perhaps decades, allowing the perennial bunch grasses more time to grow and become vigorous competitors against cheatgrass reinvasion.
Thank you for that. Again, I'll turn over to Christian to move on to our next topic.
Wow, thanks, Matt and Bryn and everyone from the Fires team for sharing these insights for managing invasive grasses and wildfires in the West. It's an issue that's only becoming more critical and is receiving more and more attention, rightly so. That video you shared of the dust storm was quite terrifying. Especially the lessons in the variability of the treatment results, I think is very important for this community to see, as well as the tie-in to your need for seeds and ORDA's new seed efforts. I feel like that's a great tie-in there. So thanks very much for making that connection.